We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. Week 4. A little bit of a different feel this morning, guys. This is actually a video that I recorded on Saturday. I'm going to be traveling to the return of Tom Brady in Foxborough, so I'll be in Boston on Sunday. So I figured that I would get out my final thoughts in a video like this, and I'll also be in the chat on Sunday morning to kind of answer as many questions as I can. But we're going to go per usual. I mean, it's going to be a similar feel, guys. I wanted this to be a premiere so that we could still have conversations in the chat as things are going on this morning, and then also kind of go through some of this news right away, because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens either tonight with the Schefter bombs or with Sunday morning. Obviously, as you guys are watching this now, I'm sure a lot of stuff is going to happen that we're going to have to talk through. But I waited as long as I could, literally leaving for the airport in about 45 minutes. So we're going to get through a bunch of this and go through each position. We're gonna have still some polls, not the same type of polls that we normally do, but we're still gonna bring it back to the old way we used to do polls, which would be really fun. Interesting week overall. I think this is one that there's no clear path, and these are the type of weeks that I really like personally. So I think that we should start, as we always do, guys, with the poll. So who is going to be week 4's most popular player, the highest owned player on the slate? So I want to know what you guys think in the chat right now. We're not going to do our typical exclamation point vote type of thing, obviously, but we'll get a good feel for it. But what I think would be a better way to do these polls as of right now through a premiere is, if you think that Derrick Henry is going to be the most popular player on the slate, I want you to put a 1 in the chat right now. We're going back to it. If you think that Cooper Kupp is going to be the most popular player on the slate, put a 2 in the chat. Let's put a 3 in the chat for Devontae Adams. And let's put a 4 in the chat for DJ Moore. I think those are going to be some of the most popular ones. Let's add in the Lions defense. I actually think that we haven't had a week where like a defense could push like 25%. So I think they're kind of interesting as well. So we'll go Derrick Henry, 1 in the chat. And then if that got a little bit confusing, I'm just curious where your guys' thoughts are. Throw a name in the chat right now, someone that you think is going to be the highest owned player in DFS this weekend. I do think it's a very interesting slate for chalk, because we talked about it on Thursday, but it's going to come down to big dog or not to big dog, right? So we'll get into that when we get to the running back position. But as we're kind of piecing our way through this, guys, wanted to make sure that we touched on news first. So one of the first things that stood out, obviously not something that comes as a super big surprise, but Chase Claypool has been downgraded to out in week 4 against the Packers. So good to know there. We will not have access to him. Hamstring injury. I guess what's brutal for me tonight is that Rob Gronkowski will not be in that game against the Patriots, but that is not on the main slate. But I thought that was an interesting one. It does look like Gerald Everett unlikely to play in week 4 with COVID. So Will Dissly is someone that we'll talk about at the tight end position, I'm sure. Some positive things here. Kenny Golladay removed from the week 4 injury report. So that's definitely interesting. This Giants pass offense just so banged up, right? So no Sterling Shepard, no Darius Slayton. So there's an instant target share that Golladay is going to walk into. It depends on what you think about Evan Ingram, which we'll get to. Someone else removed from the injury report that's very positive, Aaron Jones. I wonder where Aaron Jones and his ownership is going to lie in this one, because not super easy to get to on this slate. So he could be one of those guys in a tough matchup against Pittsburgh that goes super low owned. So we'll talk about that. Looks like Darnell Mooney currently questionable. Are we going back to Justin Fields this week? That's something we're going to have to figure out. In terms of some other stuff that we're working through here, guys, there's definitely going to be a few things, right? The one thing that stands out on the running back side of things, Elijah Mitchell, looks like he is questionable as well. So more of a pain tolerance thing for him against the Seahawks. So we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, all the stuff that's going on in Tennessee, A.J. Brown, hamstring, Julio Jones, hamstring. So when we got that news earlier in the week, that kind of flipped the slate completely on its head, right? Because I thought that was going to be a spot where a lot of people might lead But now it looks like it's probably just going to be the big dog against the Jets in terms of some really popular plays. So that changes some things. Obviously, there'll be some cheaper wide receivers that we can talk about a little bit. Very interesting. The George Kittle one was interesting to me as well, because I thought that this was trending better, but it seems like it's almost going the other way. So his calf injury is not even guaranteed to play in week 4. So that puts Deebo Samuel squarely in play for me. So we'll have to talk through this as we get through the position. So as always, definitely want you guys to continue to keep the chat flowing with news that comes through, obviously, this morning. So per usual, we're going to start with a few game environment things. So before we get into the positions, I do think it's interesting to focus on which types of games are we going to be attacking today. So the games that we could be looking at to be up pace, up in tempo, Arizona Cardinals at the LA Rams, Carolina Panthers at the Dallas Cowboys. You guys know at this point, Washington football team, Atlanta Falcons. Those are going to be some of the games that we're focused on for pace. In terms of some of the ones that might go a little bit under-owned based on their ceiling, I still really like this Minnesota and Cleveland game. I originally thought that Philly and KC was going to be extremely popular, and it might be. But I think in terms of, we're just looking at the totals here, guys, LA Rams and Arizona Cardinals, I think they're going to be extremely popular. But if we move past that top tier, the start of the week, I thought Dallas and Carolina was going to get a ton of steam. And some of those individual pieces in that game actually don't seem too bad. So there's actually a lot of stacking opportunities. We have a few games where there's a huge spread. So we got Buffalo versus Houston. We'll talk about that when we get to Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. But some really nice spots for GPPs this week, in my opinion. Like some spots that might go a little bit under-owned, which I'm super excited about. In terms of like at the line of scrimmage, we kind of like to piece together our stacks with which quarterbacks are not going to see quite as much pressure as well. So I'm a little worried about not that Jared Goff is on our radar, but everyone just piling into the Lions defense. I actually think the Bears on the other side of that is a pretty nice opportunity for us. The Ravens, I think that they're, I guess, so Lamar is one of those guys that we'll talk about, a quarterback in a second. Not getting a ton of love so far in ownership. I'm a little bit nervous that this D line for the Broncos is going to be able to get a ton of pressure. So that's one that we'll be keeping in mind. Also, the Vikings against this Brown D line. We saw what the Browns have been able to do to opposing quarterbacks this year. So a little bit worried about Kirk Cousins. That's kind of how that game goes sideways for me, even though I do like it a lot. I think it's going to get to a point where both teams are throwing a bunch, and then there's a couple really nice leverage options in that game also, depending on what you think about Dalvin Cook. So there's definitely a few things at quarterback that I want to get into, but what we like to do kind of at this time, and this will be a little bit of an abbreviated Sunday morning show in comparison to usual. So I want to get right in to the Sims. You guys know Run the Sims is our official tools partner. What I really like about using this though, guys, is we can obviously use this as a little bit of a screener, but we can use the simulator and use this slate, and we can run it 10,000 times and see which teams, I guess what types of players are popping in the optimal lineup the most often. So we can see ownership right in here as well. There's been a bunch of really nice improvements that Justin's made over there. So when we're looking at the optimal rate, so which players were popping in the optimal lineups the most, we see Travis Kelsey here, 20%, right at his projected ownership of 21.6%. So what I want to see here is someone that's popping in the optimal a ton that isn't necessarily projected for a ton of ownership. So I'm really big on Daryl Henderson this week. Not a shocker there at his salary on FanDuel. Pretty easy to get to. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the running back position, because I think there's some opportunities here. What scares me is that we see Derrick Henry here in 15% of the optimals. But I would imagine this ownership is going to be much higher on FanDuel specifically. So there is a lot of opportunity here. So think of it on the other side. A lot of the time, he's not going to be in the optimal. If he's only in 15% of the time, 10-2, he's got to have an absolutely nuclear game, which we know he can at any time. So we're going to keep that in mind. Some of these other plays that stand out to me, just looking at the Sims, a guy like Justin Jefferson in this game we like in Minnesota a ton. Almost 15% of the optimal rate, sub 10% ownership. Aaron Jones, I mentioned him before kind of at the top. 14% optimal rate, only 7%. It's very interesting. And we'll see guys on the other side of that, Cooper Kupp, Josh Allen. The Cooper Kupp price situation is one that I think is interesting because I'm very curious to see at kind of the high stakes to mid stakes where people will go with this price tag. Still popping the optimal rate about 13% of the time, but is projecting for higher ownership than that. This Carolina game, I think there's going to be chalky pieces on both sides, but DJ Moore is the one that definitely stands out. So him and Chuba Hubbard, there's going to be some decision points there in Carolina, which we'll talk about at those positions, but not a ton of surprises here. I guess outside of seeing some of these Daryl Henderson teams funnel to the top. Very interesting. So we'll go back here and we'll go to the quarterback position. We talked through some of the expensive options. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is someone that we're going to be focused on from a stacking perspective because it is one of those slates where I don't love the value, and that makes me want to try and, because I know everyone's probably in the same boat, right? It makes me want to try and figure out ways to get in Patrick Mahomes' teams in tournaments because we know this Eagles team is very strong at defending the run. So anytime I get Patrick Mahomes in like a clear pass funnel situation, I think it's a really nice bounce back spot. We saw in the Sims that Travis Kelsey popping in 20% of the optimal rate. I think it's an amazing spot to go back to him. But if everyone's just going to be on Kelsey, I would like Tyreek Hill quite a bit at wide receiver. So I'm very intrigued by this Kansas City game as a whole. Easy bringbacks on the other side. Love Devonta Smith. His price point, we talked about in the first look at wide receiver. He's just way too cheap. So that's something that stands out to me at quarterback at the high end. Do you think that Josh Allen, if we're just looking at his ownership, it looks like he's projecting for the highest owned quarterback as of now on FanDuel. The problem with these types of games is if we don't get any pushback, obviously it could get out of hand early, could be taken out of Josh Allen's hands. But if we end up getting someone like Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs for a little bit of an ownership discount together in tournaments, the ceiling is still sky high. So I'm not that worried about Josh Allen in tournaments, as crazy as that sounds, because I think there's still going to be enough people that are worried about the blowout risk and easy bring back on the other side with Brandon Cooks. We know the target share there, not the best matchup by any means, obviously, against Tre'Davious White, but the volume's going to be there. So either single stacks with Dak, I like quite, or sorry, with Diggs and Josh Allen, I like quite a bit. And the other thing about this game is it's at 1 p.m. So if you hit on some of these 1 p.m. only players, this is like a theme that we talk about constantly on this channel, is then it gives you the ability to play some of the better plays later. But if you're wrong, it still doesn't even matter because you can play more contrarian at 4 p.m. anyway. So I think at the quarterback position, obviously Josh Allen's going to draw some ownership, Patrick Mahomes as well. But then there's a pretty decent sized drop off. So if we're talking just like leverage type of stacks early, I think it's kind of interesting to go to someone like Jalen Hurts. I think that Jalen Hurts still, he's going to have that floor. But on the other side of that Kansas City game, we know that that Mahomes is going to push them. And we know that we have Devonta Smith. If we wanted to pair someone with Jalen Hurts, there's a couple different ways we can go about it. But if you hit on a low-owned Jalen Hurts stack at 1 p.m., it sets you up for a really nice spot later on where some of the chalk is going to come through that might not necessarily be the quarterback. So super interesting, I think, way to think about it. One of the things that if we want to go super cheap, if we get Justin Fields, if we get word that Justin Fields is going to start, obviously Andy Dalton dealing with that knee injury, just kind of a disaster, right? But it's Detroit, right? So he's back in play for me. Allen Robinson, easy pair with him. People that don't want to go to Darnell Mooney because of the injury, I think he's intriguing. If you wanted to pay all the way down and go back to him, not many people are going to feel comfortable with that, and he's super cheap, obviously. So the guy that we kind of skipped right over is Dak Prescott. So Dak, against this Panthers team, I originally thought that this game was going to be by far the most popular on the slate. I don't necessarily know if I feel that way anymore. So rough to see Dak obviously have some injuries on the offensive line. I still think that people are probably going to feel more comfortable going to Mahomes, going to Kyler, going to Josh Allen. So I'm intrigued. Like we just saw Zeke take all the touchdowns in prime time. Maybe it does skew back to CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, those guys. And it is a really strong game environment, of course. Easy bringbacks with either Chuba Hubbard or DJ Moore on the other side. Or if you wanted to go really cheap with one of these, I guess, other pieces in the passing game for Carolina, I like Terrence Marshall quite a bit if you're trying to save salary. Maybe Robbie Anderson finally pops off. So there's a ton to like about the Dak stacks, in my opinion. And it's just another situation where you get that information at 1 p.m. So I like that quite a bit. Those are kind of the main quarterbacks that I'm focused on. I don't have a ton as of right now of Kyler Murray. I'm a little bit nervous about the Kyler Murray stacks. Obviously, Jalen Ramsey, if you care about that sort of thing, on Nuke. But I'm a little bit more worried about that the target share has just been so spread out. It's not necessarily what we've seen from Hopkins in the past, but we'll see. I like the fact that this game's at 4 p.m. because it's an easy pivot to like a Kyler Murray with Nuke at super low ownership, when I think we're going to see a little bit more steam on even this Seattle passing game, or even just the Rams on the other side of this game, right? So there's ways to get different in this Arizona and LA Rams game that I do really like. And I think it's a little bit different than a slate we've had recently, because I think that we've seen a lot of the chalk be in the afternoon. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily like that this coming week. So we keep an eye on that. Let's keep moving through the positions though, guys, and then I'll make sure. I had a bunch of questions in the Discord that I want to get to, and I want to build some lineups at the end as well to kind of give you an idea of some of my favorite mini stacks and situations that I'm going to be targeting. But if we go to the running back position here, Saquon Barkley at 6,900, it's an enticing price tag, and I wanted to talk about him first in particular just because it's the volume's there. We see him get over 80% of the snaps again last week, but it's just such a brutal matchup against the Saints. They've already shut down Aaron Jones. They've already shut down Damian Harris, if you care about that. But like basically, if there was a spot to go to Saquon at this price, I just think that it's a really nice point per dollar play on volume. I guess don't know if the ceiling is there for you enough to eat 24% ownership is kind of my initial feel on it. But I do think that he is in play just because of the price. I think, Jonathan Taylor for significantly less ownership. It sounds crazy if you're trying to save salary like this. I still kind of think that like David Montgomery makes a lot of sense. Chuba Hubbard makes a ton of sense. So let's talk about some guys that you can pivot away from Saquon if you chose to. And David Montgomery is kind of interesting because we haven't seen really anything from Damian Williams so far. Even on pass downs, kind of like we expected, he might come in and take some of this work from David Montgomery. So obviously an amazing matchup against the Lions. Just start everyone against your Lions. But we've seen Montgomery do extremely well with this type of role in good spots, like we saw it basically to end the entire season last year. So he is at a price point where I still think that if we're just talking pure ceiling, maybe he's not like that high-end running back option that you would want to target. But I still think that the floor is really safe at 7,500 for him. So I do like that quite a bit. And Daryl Henderson on FanDuel specifically, guys, at 6K, I think is just way too cheap. I really do. Daryl Henderson, someone that... So we're talking about trying to get different in this Arizona game, right? I don't think he's going to be very owned. He's 5% right now. So if we're just talking through this, like he is expected to return. At least that's what they were saying earlier this week. So it's not clear if he's fully healthy yet, but I like going back to these guys before we see it, right? Because that's why you get this ownership from him at 5.9%. So he's really intriguing to me. Obviously, when we ran the Sims, this was one of the things that stood out to me right away. Is that optimal rate. It's probably basically due to the price and that we don't have a ton of great volume or a great value, but the volume should be there. On the other side of Montgomery, still think that Swift is in play at 7,700. We've just seen like the role that he's had just be so secure this year. But let's talk about Chuba Hubbard for a second. I don't think this is the Mike Davis 1-to-1 scenario that we had last year. So I think, it's a different scheme, obviously. Like Hubbard did play 73% of the snaps. But I have a little bit of pause here at 6,300 when we have some of these other guys in play that I think have higher ceilings. But I do think that he's totally fine. He'll definitely be in my player pool as I'm building this morning. At the higher end, Derrick Henry. What do we do with what? I mean, he's been catching balls. Like it's like my biggest argument against Derrick Henry is that he hasn't been catching passes. Yet now he does seem to have at least a 2 or 3 catch floor, which I mean is a huge difference for us guys, especially in the spot where we have no AJ Brown, we have no Julio. So I am kind of on the Derrick Henry train. I hate playing him at this ownership and at this price, but he feels like that guy at 1 p.m. that could absolutely bury you if he goes nuclear because there's not a lot of pivots after that. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I wish that potentially if you wanted to go Alvin Kamara over Derrick Henry, I think on FanDuel specifically, the ownership's going to be pretty close. I think the way to get different is if you did want to kind of fade that situation with the higher price running backs, maybe you just go to Aaron Jones because his price on FanDuel is ridiculous, guys. $7,400. He's a guy that's still going to be getting like 3 down workload. He's cheaper than, let's just look at the prices here. Aaron Jones is cheaper than Montgomery. He's cheaper than Nick Chubb. He's cheaper than Najee Harris. He's cheaper than DeAndre Swift. And people are going to shy away from this matchup. But 7% for this type of ceiling, I mean, top 4 ceiling on the slate, I still think that Aaron Jones is definitely in play for tournaments. So it's very interesting. Running back seems a little bit more wide open than I've seen the last couple weeks. So in terms of like the super cheap guys, I think that you could go down to someone like Mike Davis, even though 5,400, it's just one of those plays that's going to make the rest of your lineup work. You go Mike Davis, you go Terry McLaurin, those type of mini stacks. I think I do prefer the Calvin Ridley and McLaurin mini stacks though, just because I think if those guys pop off, like that's the type of game script where it happens, right? So let's move on to wide receiver. Do got to force myself to move a little bit quicker here than we normally do. So let's talk about the top end first. And Cooper Kupp at 8,600. He's $500 more than Devontae Adams. It's crazy to think about that. So I do think that Devontae Adams is the guy that I prefer in this range. Just the target share, guys. It just feels so safe. Aaron Rodgers in this spot against Pittsburgh. I'm just not worried about, at least through the air, them being able to shut down Rodgers and Adams in this spot. So he's going to be extremely chalky. Highest owned wide receiver for good reason on FanDuel. You can fit him in. I do like Tyreek. I was hoping we get Tyreek closer to 10 to 15%, but it looks like he's still getting a ton of steam in this spot. So I think that if you wanted to go one of those directions, is totally fine. But let's move down past that tier. I think that if you wanted to go Cooper Kupp and some smaller field stuff, you're basically betting on this game environment, right? So I think if you're playing Cooper Kupp, he's not really a one-off for me. I want to have multiple weapons from this game. DJ Moore at 7,300, definitely going to be a situation where, I mean, Dallas could just sell out to stop him. It's possible because there's really not a whole lot else for Carolina in this spot. So I think DJ Moore is totally fine. Just the role that he had. I mean, he's clearly elite, and he's doing so much work after the catch that it's one of those things that 7,300 is still a really nice price for him. So I'm in on that. We talked about Stephon Diggs with Harmon earlier. I think this is a little bit high for ownership. Is my first instinct here is I think it could be a little bit lower than this because people have been getting burned. Obviously, really high team total in this one. So you're playing with fire a little bit because if this game gets out of hand, Stephon Diggs kind of game scripted out. But the stealing is just massive. And we haven't seen it this year yet. So the ceiling for him, still top 6 or so on the slate. I think that he's going to be one of my priorities in this spot at 1 p.m. because I do like Josh Allen a ton still. One of the guys that we haven't talked about yet, or really just a ton, and I want to make sure that we focus on this Minnesota and Cleveland game a lot because I do like it quite a bit, especially if we get guys like Justin Jefferson at 8%. It's a really nice environment here. But what about OBJ? So Odell Beckham, since he came back, and another guy we talked about with Harmon, that just looks great. He looks great. Led the team in targets last week, and they're going to need him to kind of step up with Jarvis Landry out. So I think at 6,600, it's kind of a volume play. And he's been getting the type of volume that we really value. If we're just looking on a per game basis, I know it's only been one game, but third in the league in weighted opportunity rating. He's behind Devontae Adams. He's behind Brandon Cooks. So Odell Beckham, like I'm at least open to the fact that a couple weeks from now we're looking at this and just like, wow, Odell Beckham was 6,600 in the dome against Minnesota, and I do think he's going to be owned for sure. But it's a nice situation to where there's other pieces in this game that I think you can pair him with in mini stacks to get different. So let's build a team quickly, because I do want to continue to do these throughout these streams, because I think it's nice to picture it. So if we were going to go towards like a Jefferson Beckham type of mini stack, there's really the salary to make it work, in my opinion. So if you aren't going to have a Dalvin Cook in there, let's see if we can make a team work with Derrick Henry in this one. So if we wanted to go with a Josh Allen, I don't think we'll be able to get in Diggs with him if we kept in Derrick Henry. So maybe we don't go Josh Allen on this team, and maybe we go with a Hurts and Devonta. Because if we do this, I don't know if we'll be able to get Kelsey in on the other side. Let's see what happens if we put in a cheaper defense here. So if we go with, man, it's not great down there this week. I think if we wanted to pay down, we could just go to the Jets. Against Derrick Henry, I don't love that, though. We could just go to maybe the Giants against New Orleans. Jameis, that's probably what the direction that I would go if I had a Derrick Henry team. We have 5K the rest of the way, so we really need to find a cheap running back option. And say what you guys want about Mike Davis, guys. Like, if you wanted to move past like that Chuba Hubbard tier, he just like makes so much fit as I'm building teams on FanDuel this week. So if you're playing Mike Davis, you get up to 4,600 in the flex, and you probably would have to downgrade one of these plays, obviously, to make it work. But I think that piecing this together, if you didn't want to play Travis Kelsey here, obviously it opens up a ton. You can go Terry McLaurin in your flex. And then you still have 5,700 left at tight end, like that range. Like you get to that Dawson Knox type of player in the high total game, which I do like. You can even play Evan Ingram if you really wanted to. So thinking through some of these mini stacks, I do like that quite a bit. And Jalen Hurts is one of those guys that does make a lot fit. And you can still get to a bunch of these studs, which there's a ton of alphas in a lineup like this, which I like. So some other wide receivers. Let's talk through some cheaper guys. Obviously, with A.J. Brown and Julio out, there's an opportunity for a guy like Westbrook to come in and basically just be that cheap option that gets you there. I guess don't know if the ceiling is super high for a guy like that. So I would prefer to get to someone like Terrence Marshall. He's 5K. At least we know he has that downfield role. And he's been one of those guys that's been used in the slot enough too. And that's kind of where you'd want to attack this defense. So I do like Terrence Marshall a lot in that range. I think that Darnell Mooney is an interesting GPP play just because he's coming off that injury. Same thing with Kenny Golladay. And those guys are going to see targets. If you do have the big dog, I don't hate the mini stack with Corey Davis to kind of differentiate yourself a little bit. And Corey Davis just 5,700, number one wide receiver there. So I do think that's interesting. Michael Pittman at 5,800, I still think is okay. I don't think he's one of my favorite plays down there, but if he's going to hold at like, let's go back here to run the Sims quickly. If Pittman is going to hold at this ownership, though, I do think he's at least an interesting flyer at wide receiver. DK Metcalf in these Seattle stacks, obviously we'll see what happens with Kittle, but 12% for DK Metcalf with Lockett banged up. I think that Metcalf could end up having a massive ceiling in this game, just a really nice volume spot for him. You can pair him with Debo if Kittle's out. Just in general, I think Debo is one of the better price plays at 6,900. He's someone I'm interested in. Mini stacks with Pittman and Waddle if you really did want to go that range on the cheaper side. And Calvin Ridley's at this price where I actually, if this game gets steamed, maybe this seems a little bit high. I do prefer kind of just to pay for Kyle Pitts at tight end. There's just so much uncertainty there in Atlanta. Cortland Sutton's the guy that I think we are going to see pop off at some point. Jake mentioned him on the show this week. I think that he's interesting. In terms of leverage, though, and this is one of the questions we had in the Discord that I wanted to hit on, if you have some failures at 1 p.m., some wide receivers that I think we should be kind of the most focused on here are going to be ones that still have a ton of ceiling. So we talked about DeAndre Hopkins. He's 7,600. He's not going to be owned. We talk about a guy like Marquise Brown at 6,400. He's sub 2% right now projected. No one wants to play this guy after what happened last week. So I think that he's an interesting pivot. Tyler Lockett banged up, sub 5%. I think that he's an interesting pivot. If you need like a cheap guy, I actually don't mind the idea of just going to one of these cheaper Arizona guys either. We mentioned it's been so spread out. Maybe Christian Kirk gets in there and has a game for you. Maybe AJ Green scores a touchdown at 5,600 on FanDuel and gets you there. Rondale Moore's 5,300 still. So like these Arizona guys are projecting for like no ownership, and they're still super cheap. Brandon Ayuk at 5,700. Like we mentioned, like these mini stacks with Metcalf. Man, I think that Brandon Ayuk at 5,700, especially if Kittle's out, super interesting for him. I think that his ownership might approach 10%, but I could be wrong on that. Some running backs in the afternoon that I really like for leverage. Najee Harris is 8,200. I think there's enough people that aren't going to believe that game that he just had with all the targets. So I think Najee's an interesting, because I think he's pretty overpriced, but I think he's an interesting pivot if you get in trouble after the morning. And maybe even Chase Edmonds at 6,100. Like those are the ones I think that stand out, because I think Daryl Henderson is going to end up being a little bit chalkier than I realized. I don't think he's going to stay where we had him at like 7% or so around the Sims. I could see him getting closer to like 15 to 20 by the time. I mean, people are going to see that price on FanDuel and it's just going to stand out like a sore thumb, right? So if Daryl Henderson is in your optimal team in the afternoon, maybe you do move away from that. So let's walk through tight end quickly. We can definitely go through Travis Kelsey. Obviously, he's expensive, 8,200. He's worth it. I do think that like not a slate with Darren Waller, potentially not a slate with George Kittle, or just have George Kittle being banged up. I think paying up for him, totally fine. If you want to pay down, that price point at 5,800 for Kyle Pitts, he's just too cheap, in my opinion. For the type of ceiling, obviously the usage is definitely a concern from Arthur Smith. But just the raw like talent and ability from this guy, I'm still going to be taking some swings with Kyle Pitts for sure. Evan Ingram, I mentioned it, like the target tree is a little bit more shrunk there, so I think that he's interesting on FanDuel if you're trying to get access to that Giants game. If you did really want to have like a Kamara, maybe you could just do like a mini stack with Kamara and Evan Ingram. I think that's kind of interesting. If you want to really punt it off, maybe you do believe that Tyler Lockett's super banged up. Maybe Will Dissly, just to punt that off. If you did want to double stack someone like Russ at super low ownership, maybe just go Metcalf Dissly, something like that. Yeah. So got a few more minutes here before I got to jump in an Uber and head to the airport. So want to make sure that I get to a couple of these questions that we had in the Discord. We already went through some of the favorite kind of late swap options that we had. I think that this slate is going to be one where obviously the news is going to change some things. Guys like Claypool out. I don't know if we were really on Claypool, but like the ceiling for someone like that, I was at least considering him at one point. There's these cheaper wide receivers. It's probably going to come down to guys like if you want to kind of get ahead of someone like Darnell Mooney, if you want to pay down for someone, even like McCole Hardman in that KC Philly game, I think is kind of interesting. Jalen Waddle, Pittman, mini stacks. Does Terrence Marshall catch a deep one finally for us? Or would we have been better off pivoting down to someone like Nick Westbrook? Just where there's, I mean, who are they going to throw to in Tennessee, right? Kind of interesting. We talked about Evan Ingram. Maybe it's Kadarius Toney for a super cheap like wide receiver flyer. But I don't love that personally. So I'm going to try and stick to at least what the Sims are telling me so far on some of these cheaper guys. On the wide receiver side, I think it's most of the guys that we already talked about today. Very interesting. So trying to think if we missed anything else here. I'll try and jump in the Discord a little bit more this morning. So if you're a tier 2, tier 3, definitely come hang out in there. We'll be talking through the slate. If we have any more news to go through, definitely will be around for that. What I didn't mention yet, the Joe Holka Show Listener League. At the time of this recording, we're at 1,300 of 2,000. That's just not good enough, guys. We got to try and fill this thing up. Sunday morning, I know a bunch of you guys jump in here, but let's get in there. $5, rake free, 3 max tournament. Let's fill this thing up this week. I think we can get there. Obviously, some great prizes on top. Anytime it's rake free, these are the type of tournaments that you want to be playing in. And definitely check out Run the Sims if you haven't already. Everything is free this week. So check that out. If you do like what you've been kind of messing around with, poking around with this morning at Run the Sims, definitely hit me up in Discord. We'll get you set up with a subscription next week. Joe Holka, I guess runthesims.com/Holka will get you that discount code. Trying to think if I missed anything else. A little bit of a scrambly weekend, obviously traveling, but appreciate you guys being with me here on Sunday morning for this premiere. A little bit of a different feel. The Monday stream, normally at 2 p.m. Eastern time, is going to be on Tuesday. Going to be in the airport all day on Monday, but it'll actually give us a little bit. There's my alarm. Call Uber. So the Monday show, usually we have not quite as much to talk about that early in the week. Now it's going to be on Tuesday. We'll have all the regular segments, regular guests. Maybe we'll have a little bit more time to work through some stuff. So appreciate all you guys for being here. Subscribe if you haven't been here before. If you found this channel this morning, appreciate you. Definitely toss a like on this video, all that good stuff. The last thing, check out the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I'm really trying to build that up as well. But that's going to do it, guys. Hopefully this game's a lot of fun tonight. Patriots, Bucks, gonna be super interesting. I'm excited. Never been to Foxborough before, so I will see you guys on Tuesday. Good luck this week.